So some caveats here. First of all, I feel horrible, and it's not because I'm hungover, shockingly. I seem to have acquired some disease in transit, so I spent all last night actually like in bed asleep, and I've now whacked out on orange juice until my eyes are swimming and Advil and some other odds and ends. So if I do just kind of curl up in a ball, just do sock puppets for a while, and everything will all work out. It seemed like there was something other important thing I was going to say, but it's probably not that important. Anyway, we're here to talk about trusted computing. I really appreciate y'all showing up for this. Given the lineup for the 10 o'clock between Litchfield and Ophir and Halvar and Kaminsky and Dr. What's his name? I can't remember his name. It's quite a selection, so I certainly appreciate you coming here. But if it sounds funnier in the other rooms, I'll let you go. You can go somewhere else. Anyway, humor engine still starting up. Two-stroke, you got to pull it a few times. For those that have seen me speak before, standard issue slide number 2, don't believe anything I say, all right? Security industry is in a really fun state right now because there's a lot of money in it. It's also a very dangerous state right now because there's a lot of money in it. And so the honest brokers that we used to have many of whom are now gainfully employed and have other agendas besides being an honest broker. And these conferences get, before I used to have this slide up because there were people who were on stage saying things that sometimes just weren't technically sound. You know, we didn't have the academic discipline in this community to say bullshit, you know, when something wasn't right. Someone would say 1 and 1 is 3 and everyone would write it down. You'd see it in the press the next day, a couple weeks later being wired. You're like, this is crazy. Well, now we're at a point where people know what they're talking about. Their motivations may be different. So really, when you see people on stage these days, you know, I know Jeff and crew at BlackHat take pride on not having vendor pitches up here and people talking about, hey, look how cool my product is. It's amazing how well you can disguise a vendor pitch when you try hard enough. It's really amazing. So by day, I'm a dirty consultant. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton, and by night, I'm the founder of the Shmoo Group. I still like to consider myself fairly unbiased. I'm talking about a subject that's going to be unpopular. I've gotten into arguments with good friends about this particular subject. Screaming contest, as a matter of fact, in my own basement. And I think it's worth noting, if you disagree with me today, feel free to point it out, and let's have some discussion about it. So there's 2 things we're going to try to accomplish. The first is we're going to talk about what is trusted computing, and let's make a case for it. You know, let's figure out why trusted computing is useful. Let's not talk about, we'll talk about some of the evils and things, but honestly, there's a lot of good that can happen with this technology. And I want to try to demonstrate some of that, give you examples, and give you a better understanding of what this technology is and isn't. You know, there is no evil bit. Like, oh, you had it set to evil. Click, for those that remember that Simpsons episode. You know, there is no little evil switch in the back of this stuff. The second is we want to be able to demonstrate TPM on a MacBook. So hopefully we'll get to that depending on how long everything else takes. And hopefully we'll have some good arguments along the way. Oh, and there's actually some code. So this is my anecdotal diagram of the brief history of InfoSec for the last 50 years. You know, we've been solving a problem at a kind of a linear scale, throwing money at it, academic time. It turns out the total problem just keeps getting bigger. You know, I like to think we're getting closer to solving all the problems. We're closer to solving the problems we had 10 or 15 years ago, and the new problems that we have today, we're nowhere near solving. Security and service-oriented architectures, anyone? If you want to talk about that afterwards, we're in our infancy about that. You know, we can't figure out how to write, you know, an IP driver properly. You know, I want to see you go write code at an enterprise level in some service-oriented architecture properly. Let's figure that problem out. That'll be, again, we'll have it solved in 10 or 15 years. You know, and again, it's funny what happens when you chase an impossible dream, how profitable it can become. So, what are the current trends? First of all, we got defense in depth. You know, this is certainly, you know, these threat management, I guess that's what they call them, threat management devices that are IDS, IPS, firewalls, antivirus, all in one box. You know, those are really in vogue these days. You know, that's layered defense at the network layer like you can't believe. You're like, we're just slapping everything together. So the real problem, though, is we've got unsolvable issues at the base of the problem that all we're doing is applying Band-Aids to. As a defense in depth is an admission that we can't solve the core problems, so let's layer on a bunch of security until we've slathered on enough stuff that the cake that I made looks like a cake as opposed to the goo that popped out of the cake pan and broke into a million pieces. Access to systems is access to data. You know, if you have physical access to a system, you own it, right? This is not a challenging thing. We have boot disks these days. You pop it in, you go download the local database of the passwords, you crack them, poof, and you're in. You know, Hikari and crew have taken malicious slave devices to a new level. You know, you plug in devices, they auto-own stuff. It's really neat, kind of fun. And transactions generally are trusted at a network level, right? I mean, we're talking about things that are secure between two kind of vague endpoints, but not all the way down to the piece of hardware that it was actually running on. So, how do we get here? This was a paper released by Butler Lampson, who is you know, a great kind of InfoSec CS researcher from the early 70s, wrote these lines and talked about, here's why we want to put protection mechanisms on computers. And basically it goes into multi-level security, need for hardware security to enforce data separation, object-based access control. You know, this would be a contemporary paper today. You know, we haven't solved these problems. Same problem that we had back in 1971. It's remarkable how little has changed. Oh, this was supposed to be an animation and it wasn't. So the answer's at the bottom. I apologize. my PowerPoint foo has gone out the window today due to how I'm feeling. Anyway, I'll give you a minute to read this. Yeah, thank you, thank you. October 1972, if you want to cut to the punchline. You know, this is the problems the Air Force was having in October of 1972. And, you know, they were saying, hey, we're, you know, having all these disclosures, we can't write good software, people are breaking into it, they're poking and prodding us. If you read through this document, it's a big document. If you redact out all the system names, PDP-11 or whatever the hell they were running back then, the rest of the document still is contemporary. It's probably the same problems the Air Force is having today. You know, this is no different. We haven't solved the goddamn thing. 1972, we're 35 years on. Congratulations, guys, this is where we're at. Search for the Holy Grail. You know, so this is like AI. You know, you talk about AI in the 50s. Oh, in 5 years we'll have computers that do all the thinking for us. We'll just write symbolic languages that do all the heavy lifting, like a Lisp. You know, Lisp was supposed to be the answer to the God, the universe, and everything. You just take the world's knowledge book, encode it into Lisp, and it was all symbolic. And then you write a program that thought like a human, and then and we'd have these little automatons running around doing all our work for us, and we'd be sipping margaritas on the beach. Turns out it's not that easy. Turns out that AI was more of a game of horsepower than it was elegance, right? People thought, oh, if we make these really elegant languages, things will be fantastic. Well, what you really needed to do is codify the world's knowledge in minute detail in massive databases, and then write really complex heuristics to get things to actually make sense and be able to have artificially intelligent-like decisions. 1950, that wasn't really possible. I don't know how many people saw the 50th anniversary of the hard drive was a couple days ago, and the hard drive was 50 megabytes, and it was the size of 2 refrigerators. So, you know, even before Wikipedia, I think we can assume that the world's knowledge, you know, exceeded 50 megabytes. So, you know, MLS is a similar thing. The idea here is that you've got multiple domains of security running concurrently on one operating system, and the operating system can basically enforce objects not to talk to each other or only exchange certain types of information. It's, you know, if you were to, in a vacuum design, how would I build the most secure system in the world? You would come up with MLS. This is just, that's the thinking. And so it's a fantastic idea. It's like AI. Hey, it sounds fantastic. Turns out when they dreamed this up, it was really freaking hard. You know, in the late 60s, early 70s, when this idea first kind of really was kicking around, it was very difficult to do MLS. Well, you know, there were some results that came out of all the littered corpses. Operating systems are complicated. You know, shocker. I know, I got the Windows Vista DVD that they're giving away, I think, over at the Microsoft booth. It's a behemoth of an operating system. Linux is a behemoth of an operating system, for those that hadn't noticed. I compiled a Linux kernel for the first time in forever the other day, and I noticed like the tarball exploded, and then it was like 350 megs of source code or some shit. And then it compiles out, and I have like almost a gigabyte of kernel goo stored in user source. I'm like, holy, that's the kernel. Like, wow. I bought a bigger drive. It was fantastic. Software developers don't know how to write secure code. It's the truth. You know, there are people in this room who get paid to audit code for a living, and they get paid well, and there aren't nearly enough of them because software developers write crappy code, period. there's this kind of crazy thing that software developers generally have concerns like time, money, how much money you spend to write it. Quality, the third part of that little triangle, kind of falls off the map a lot of times. Further, we're letting people out of school who don't have a clue how to write secure code. They might know how to compile in OpenSSL support and fake out some crypto protocol and do the worst implementation of SSL imaginable, but they don't really have a solid understanding of how to write secure code. And ultimately, without some trusted hardware on which you can layer on security assertions, the best thing you can do is layer defense in depth. You say, well, at the baseline, I give up because we haven't been able to do physical, hardware security. So we'll start a little bit above that, where it's already really complicated, and then watch it blossom up from the operating systems, the applications, and the network, and then we'll slap some firewalls on that, and we'll call that security. So let's go ahead, 40 years here. 2000, DRM emerges. Content is king. Everyone thought, AOL Time Warner was going to be the granddaddy Uber organization of all time, right? Taking together the best of the internet, AOL, and Time Warner, and ultimately you're supposed to have this amazing capability. So I think we all know DRM, you're cryptographically protecting some chunk of data so that content providers can control who can see it, where it gets seen, shared, and all that kind of stuff. DRM is not perfect. The DRM techniques that have come out in wide use can be subverted very easily when it's software only. For the debugging folks, the folks who are over watching Hallbar or Litchfield or somewhere else right now could tell you, hey, it's just software, right? We just shim out the parts that we don't need, and hey, everything, we watch where all the mystery bits are stored, we decrypt it all and write it down. Or if you're really interested, you can just, if it's an audio, you just pipe it out to another audio device. You just transcode the damn thing, and oh, look, I have transcoded audio. Who the hell cares if it's now an MP3 and not AAC? And even hardware-based systems can be, pwned. You look at DVD John and what he was able to do in the entire DVD industry. Thank God. How many people burned or ripped DVDs on a PC? Did it hurt? It was a difficult process. How many people ripped DVDs on a Mac? Was it easy? Yeah. There's this program called Handbrake. Brother, you hit a button. Oh, look. Like every time I put a DVD in, it just rips it down to disk. It's fantastic. It's a one-button rip. I encourage you, not that I'm a Mac zealot, but to go buy a Mac. So, guess what? DRM is cool, in case you hadn't heard. Now, there's a little leap of faith here. This is a transitivity thing, so you kind of have to follow it. First of all, according to a recent survey of college students, iPod are now cooler than beer. Okay, I don't know what school these people were from, but apparently somewhere in the Midwest. No offense to the Midwesterners in the room. Anyway, the iPod, basically was the basis for iTunes Music Store, right? iTunes Music Store was made possible because Apple came up with a DRM mechanism that was tenable to the content providers. So they all said, hey, this is fantastic. We'll let you put up songs at a bucket pop and sell them to people in a mass market. February 2006, 1 billion songs have been sold off of iTunes Music Store. I don't know what constitutes cool, but 1 billion of anything generally is. I don't know how many albums Christina Aguilera has sold, but I assume it's not nearly 1 billion. So DRM is also cooler than Christina Aguilera. So through transitivity, Apple made DRM cool, right? Okay, so that's a leap of faith. There's a lot of transitivity here. Clearly make transitivity jumps. There's some lossy bits to it, but you just have to bear with. What does that have to do with hardware?